Story time. I'll tell you guys a story. Yeah, I'll tell you guys a story. Once upon a time, there was a king, a great warrior named Gilgamesh. He and his friend Enkidu went on many great adventures together, some of which offended the gods. After one adventure, during which they killed a mighty beast called the Bull of Heaven, the gods were so offended that they sentenced Enkidu to death. So, they sent a sickness upon Enkidu, and he died. Shaken by the death of his friend and a sudden awareness of his own mortality, Gilgamesh sets out in a search of his ancestor, Utnapishtim, to whom he's heard the gods long ago granted immortality. Gilgamesh finds Utnapishtim living at the mouth of the rivers and asks how he too can achieve immortal life. Utnapishtim tells Gilgamesh that while he was the king of Sharepik, the god Enki, who's the god of wisdom and purification, appeared to him in a dream and warned him that after a secret meeting, the gods had decided to destroy humankind with a flood. To preserve life, Enki ordered Utnapishtim to disassemble his house and use the wood to build an enormous boat called the Preserver of Life. Enki drew up plans for the boat, which had 7 floors and was divided into 63 sections, taking a team of builders 7 days to complete. Does this story sound familiar to anyone?
Oh.
Sure. Yeah. Enki commanded Utnapishtim to bring his wife and family aboard, along with the craftsmen who helped build the ship, some baby animals, their silver and gold, and grains. The storm began, flooding the earth, wiping out every living thing that wasn't on the boat. It lasted 7 days, after which the preserver came to rest on Mount Nasir. After resting there for 7 days, Utnapishtim sent a dove to find dry land, but it returned, indicating that the waters were still on the earth. After 7 more days, he sent out a swallow, but it too returned. Finally, after 7 more days, he sent a raven that did not return. Utnapishtim released all the animals and made a sacrifice to the gods. For their faith, the gods granted Utnapishtim and his wife immortality and an honored place among the gods. Therefore, Utnapishtim tells Gilgamesh, he was granted immortality under very specific conditions. So it's impossible to achieve immortality. And so he tells Gilgamesh to abandon his hope for immortality. Abandon his quest. Gilgamesh insists he's worthy. So Utnapishtim gives him a test to prove it. He tells him to stay awake for a week. No sleep. Gilgamesh fails to make it even a single night, and without sleeping, so though he claims he was just resting his eyes. So that excuse goes back thousands of years. Utnapishtim then gives him another task, to retrieve a plant of youth from the bottom of the sea. Gilgamesh is successful at first, but a serpent comes along and steals the plant and swims away. Accepting that he's lost his opportunity for immortality and renewed youth, Gilgamesh returns to the city of Uruk and eventually dies. And so this story is somewhat familiar to us. We were saying it sounds a lot like the Noah Ark story. So this is actually from a poem called the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's dated to about 2100 years to 1800 years BC. So it's a very old story. It actually seems to maybe predate the Noah story. Another brief story. This one might sound more familiar. There was once a righteous man named Noah. However, he lived in a time when humanity had become wicked and corrupt. Seeing this, God decided to punish all mankind with a great flood. All except Noah and his family, who found grace in the eyes of the Lord because they loved God and obeyed him with their whole hearts. God commanded Noah to build an ark, and on that ark gather 2 of every sort of animal to be saved from the flood. Noah followed God's command and along with his sons built the ark. In the 600th year of Noah's life, the fountains of the deep burst apart and the floodgates of heaven broke open. Rain fell on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights until even the mountaintops were covered in water. They remained on the earth for 150 days, and every living thing perished. But Noah and his family and the animals were spared. As the waters receded, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. But Noah and his family remained on the ark. Noah sent a raven and a dove to search for dry land, but the dove returned. After 7 days, Noah sent the dove again, and it returned with an olive leaf in its mouth. After 7 more days, Noah again sent the dove, but it did not return, indicating that the waters had subsided. God then called Noah and his family and all the animals out of the ark. Noah and his family emerged from the ark and built an altar to sacrifice and praise to God. God sent a rainbow in the sky as his covenant with Noah, and he would never flood the earth again. And this is the story that most of us are probably more familiar with. And this story dates to about 1700 BC. So it's a bit newer, probably, than the Gilgamesh story. There's another one. I won't read this one to you, but it's on the PowerPoint. You can take a look at it if you want. This comes from the, Wanabusu, and the Great Flood. And this dates, it's an ancient story from the Native Americans. So this goes back to the first people tribes of the Americas, specifically North America. We don't have an exact date on it, but we know that when people showed up here in the 16th century, 15th century, they already had the story. So they also have a flood story that occurs here in the U.S., well, the Americas. Another one from ancient Acadia, 1700 BC as well. It's called the Epic of Gilgamesh. And these are all just summaries that I wrote up. There's an Aztec flood myth as well. We've got one from China, 2300, which may actually predate the Gilgamesh one, which is also very old, and so forth. You know? In fact, if you look around the world, we've got over 100 of them we're going to see. So I made this little thing here with little pink dots that tell us where these flood myths come from. Does anything stand out to you about this pattern of distribution? Yeah.
Is more snow or something?
What's that?
Along the coast.
Yeah. Yeah, they're all along these coasts. All along the coasts. And that's an interesting thing. So the question becomes, we're going to see, how is it that all of these cultures from all over the world have these same stories, a very similar story? The names will be a bit different. Some of the details are different, but we're going to see some patterns. I just saw this really, I'm going to come back to this slide in a minute. It's a little bit outside the scope, but I just saw something fascinating about the myths that come from around here. They're quite interesting. But we see them from Europe. I have here Greece, Germany, Ireland have them. From the Americas, we have the Inca, the Maya, the Hopi, the Pawnee, the Lakota, the Arapaho. We see them down here in Africa. We see them in Asia. We see these stories all over the world. So it becomes this question, how do they all have these same flood myths? There's over 100 of them. There's over 100 of them. And they all seem to follow a very similar pattern. It's the pattern here that's very important. In all the cases, humanity has grown wicked. It's never just the gods saying, you know what, we need some water. Let's flood this place. No, it's always in response to the behavior of humanity. Humanity has become wicked. The god or the gods are angry, and they use water to judge humanity. And it's built into the idea of judging humanity, because humanity is not wiped out. There's always like one group of people who are good, who are saved. So if you think about it, if all of humanity was wicked, they would just wipe the whole thing out and make new people. But no, the idea is that humanity is being judged, and it's a fair judge, because the people who are saved are the only good ones on the planet. One righteous person, they're commanded to build a large boat. That person is spared, usually along with their family and some animals. The birds are interesting. Doves and ravens. Doves and ravens are always seem to appear in these stories, which is an interesting thing. Afterwards, a sacrifice is given, and then afterwards, a promise is given by the deities not to ever do this again. And some set of a covenant is given. It's the same pattern that follows. So again, it begs this question: how is it that these cultures from all over the world, from all these different times, scattered all over the place, have very similar stories? This doesn't seem to make any sense. Because if we're scattered all over the world, we shouldn't have the same kind of myth, especially on continents in which people never really interacted. So specifically, we don't find it with just that flood story, though. We find it with myths. We have very similar myths. Dreams. We interpret dreams, and we have this idea that we can interpret them, and that we have the same kinds of interpretations. Phobias, this phobia of like serpents seems to happen all over the world. It doesn't really matter where you go. There's a phobia. There's a general phobia of serpents. There's a general phobia of spiders and insects and things like that. Yeah.
I heard that people are scared Like if the world's gonna flood with water?
If the world's going to flood?
Yeah.
Why?
Like a lot of people like scared of like a lot of water, like,
Oh, because of the ice caps melting?
I think.
Yeah, it's really funny. The people who talk about they're buying beachfront property. Isn't that interesting? I'm not joking about that either. You can look that up. Like Bill Gates has bought a whole bunch of beachfront properties. Well, if he thinks it's going to flood out, why would you buy beachfront property?
We'll probably like own a beach
Well, there wouldn't be a beach. It'd be underwater.
or like the ocean.
Well, he owns the ocean. When I come through, you gotta pay a toll.
You build the underwater bridge.
He doesn't own the water. He just owns the ground underneath it. He'll be down there. Bubbles going up. What's he saying? I don't know, man.
Probably drowning.
Yeah. Driving hard. I don't know. We should take the chains off his feet. Morality, and this is also something again that we take for granted. Like I was saying earlier, we take for granted from Freud this idea that we have an unconscious. We have these experiences that inform our adult life. We just can't take it for granted. We also take for granted that we, generally speaking, have the same morality. We might say there are some nuances that will be different, but like you aren't going to find a culture in the world that says, you know what, murder is a good thing, you know, or stealing, that's a good thing, you know. Murder might make sense because if you have a culture that believes in murder, the culture is not there anymore, right? They all kill each other. But other things, like we have this general sense that charity is a good thing. We have this general sense that stealing is a bad thing. So it doesn't, you know, we take it for granted, but the hard part about conceptualizing these things is to step outside of it and not take these things for granted. You know, like I said, the phobias. Many people have a phobia of serpents, and yet many of us have never handled a serpent. We've never seen one in real life. At the best, maybe we've seen one on the other side of a glass cage at the zoo, or we've seen pictures of them. It doesn't seem to make any sense that we have a phobia of something with which we've never interacted. And then also for Jung, we're going to see this understanding of symbols, and then ultimately we're going to see what constitutes these ideas of character types, like hero. Like what's a hero? What's a villain? If I said to you guys, did anybody watch Money Heist by any chance on Netflix? Yeah. It was neat. I got like, you know, the first 2 seasons into it, and I was sitting there going like, you know what? I took out my phone. One of my students recommended it to me back in September. And I just, for some reason, I wrote down my phone like, okay, I'll check it out. And I didn't even realize that that was the thing I was watching. But in that show, if I were to ask you, who are the heroes? Who are the villains? Is anybody still watching it? Okay.
I'm still in the first season.
Okay. Earmuffs. Anybody finished it? Okay, so you know the character Guardia? Okay, is Guardia a hero or is he a villain? Right? He's a security guard. Well, he's a bodyguard. And you sit there, and if you watch the show, he's doing the right thing. You know, he's kind of a jerk about it, but he's the one who's trying to stop what people generally think are terrorists, and yet he's the villain. You know, when you see him going about it. Now, I don't have to tell you he's the villain. We just kind of intuitively know he's the villain, because even though he's doing the right things, he's doing them in the wrong way. And so we intuitively know that what he does aligns more with the villain than with the hero. And so the point that Jung is making here is that we follow these types, we know what they are, even if we can't articulate them. Okay. Questions?
Last semester you mentioned that like this could come from like your ancestors, like what's in your body and stuff.
Yeah, and that's what he's going to get at with regards to the idea of the collective unconscious. That these are things that come to us. Essentially, they're types of genetic memories, things that are passed down from generation to generation from our ancestors. So, yes, very important.